welcome back to Ask the Panel Guys. This is episode 11. We're going to be talking about substrates, what they are, what types, and how we use them. I'm David Altfeld. This is Chris Reutlinger. We're engineers here at MillerClapperton.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us today. As David mentioned, I'm Chris Reutlinger, one of the engineers here, and I'm going to be talking about what substrates are. And so I think there's a lot of confusion in the industry as to what they are, and really it's very simple. It's what connects our panels back to the building. And so what you see behind me actually are several different sort of scenarios or situations we run into in our projects. On the left, we actually have a situation where we have some soffit panels that are attached to some Z-girts, which are cold formed that we make, and then cold formed framing that's actually provided by the contractor. And then just to the right of that, we have a scenario where we have a steel structure on the left. We have some metal stud framing on the right with some sheathing on top of it. And our panels will actually go across this. It'll look like one wall when it's finished. And then we get into this scenario where we actually have concrete framing. And so, these look very different. And from our perspective, they actually are very different. We run into situations with substrates where different materials have different tolerances. And so trying to frame out this steel structure might be entirely different than trying to frame out this metal stud wall. And likewise, trying to frame out from the cold form metal framing to our stuff on the soffit might be different as well. So we want to be looking at really how we construct and build those layers and design those layers from the panel to our extrusions to a lot of times some Z-girts, which provide some extra spacing, back to either the wall that's constructed of either metal studs or concrete or steel. And so these are the kind of conditions that we're dealing with, and they all provide a different, unique approach because we're trying to make sure that the wall at the end of the day in this scenario looks like one continuous wall, even though that this steel structure is different in sort of stiffness and strength than this metal stud wall that's behind it over here. So that's really the different types of substructures we have. I think David's going to get into a little bit more detail as to the parts and pieces and what they look like. So with that, I'll hand it back over to him.
First example here is a steel galvanized Z-girt. This is a cost-effective solution that we would use to go over insulation or when the building structure is not oriented the way we need it. So this would get mounted with shims to the wall. This is a fiber cement panel. We would frequently use this with an aluminum extrusion on top of the horizontal steel Z-girt. This is a MCM panel. It would come from our shop fabricated this way with all the aluminum extrusions on it. Those aluminum extrusions would mount in the same way to this horizontal steel Z-girt. This is one of our concealed fastener systems that would be used on HPL or fiber cement panels. This would be mounted to the wall. This clip would be mounted to the back of the panel. They interlock like that. A fastener goes in from the top to keep them from moving. This is a proprietary system that's manufactured by Nightwall. This is a system that we've used behind our panels in some cases. This horizontal piece would act similar to the Z-girt, could be mounted to the vertical studs, and then there's a vertical member that can be positioned anywhere we need it.
So now that we covered what subframing is and the different types that we use, or at least some of the different types that we use, we're going to talk a little bit more about how we use it and how it comes into play. What you can see behind me is actually a wall that has some horizontal Z-girt framing, and really that Z-girt framing is to push our panels off the wall and create a gap. And sometimes that's for insulation, sometimes that's for airflow. There's all sorts of different reasons as why we do that. And generally what we want to be creating is systems of overlapping horizontal and vertical subframing systems. So in this case, we would have horizontal Z-girts, and then we would have, say, vertical extrusions, and together they form our subframing assembly that gets from our panels back to our wall. So one of the things that we can run into in a scenario like this, where if these Z-girts get really, really deep and say our panels are really far off the wall, then those panels actually can cause those Z-girts to sag. And so we would need to either provide some straps or some other systems to be able to hold that up into place. And so as these Z-girts get really, really deep, there's some additional things from an engineering perspective that we need to look at to make sure that our panels stay exactly where we need them, where we want them.
Chris just talked about the different layers of framing that we use, horizontal and vertical overlapping. Sometimes the space between the members is driven by the fasteners and their pull-out capacities. Sometimes the parts need to be closer together or even made thicker so that they can still attach firmly.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today. We did, run through a little bit about substrates and what they are, how we use them, different types that we have, and I think we've hopefully given you a little bit of an overview of how that works. We appreciate you joining us and being with us.
And if you like this video, or even if you don't, click the like button below. If you want to leave us a comment or ask a question, you can do that below as well.
Thanks so much for joining us, and keep a lookout for episode 12 coming shortly.